Okay, well, welcome everybody to our webinar, The Risks of Aging in 2020. It's our virtual webinar, Cognitive Impairment, Long-Term Care, What You Need to Know and How to Pay for It. We will have two different presenters today. Our first presenter will be elder law expert, Robert Slutsky. And our second presenter will be Kristen Wilson. She is the co-owner and physical therapist at Action Potential One-on-One Physical Therapy. To tell you a little bit about Rob has been practicing for almost 30 years. We have an office, Slutsky Elder Law Firm, in Plymouth Meeting. We have one in Malvern and we have one in Radnor. And we are doing video consultations now as well as phone consultations. We are here to be a resource to you. We serve the 5 counties, Philadelphia, Bucks, Montco, Chesco, and Delaware County. And Kristen has 2 locations. She has one in Kennett and one in Glen Mills. And she's going to tell you a little bit more about her background and some of her experiences that she's had. Okay. Our hot topics that we will cover today, the first one being, what is cognitive impairment and how does it affect older adults? Staying safely in the home, power of attorney versus guardianship. Do you have a choice? Signs that someone should not live independently. Paying for long-term care, options. Ways to reduce risk for falls. And now we have elder care attorney Rob Slutsky with part of his presentation.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. It looks like we have a lot of familiar faces. So, as an elder law attorney, one of the things that I deal with every day, almost in practice, is the concept of cognitive impairment. But a lot of people really don't understand it. And from my perspective, cognitive impairment is not just memory impairment. First of all, it can take a lot of different forms. And as far as impairment goes, I look at memory difficulties as just one component, potentially, of cognitive impairment, because there are people out there who have coping skills, and therefore their memory impairment may not affect their life qualitatively or their function because they're able to compensate due to the acknowledgement and recognition of the memory impairment. What I consider with cognitive impairment is how it affects one's daily life and function. And typically, the biggest issue we have with cognitive impairment is when either the memory impairment or potential psychiatric symptoms show up, and they affect the ability of the individual to independently be safe and care for themselves. Can we go back to the previous slide just so I have it up in my mind?
Sure, hang on one second, Rob. We're trying to figure out, someone is not on mute. If you could just take a quick peek and mute yourself. I was trying to navigate that and then lost our slide. Bear with me here. There we go.
Okay.
Thank you, sorry about that.
Oh, no problem, no problem. So again, the most important thing about cognitive impairment isn't the impairment part. It's how it affects quality of life. It's how it affects someone's function. Because cognitive impairment, again, is not really relevant unless it's affecting someone's ability to do their normal activities. If they are safe in their home and they have someone to lean on and that they trust that person and act appropriately and allow that person to assist them, then whether they have other impairments is irrelevant. As long as they're safe and they're enjoying life and they're not in danger, really, that's the issue. When is intervention needed? Well, one thing we always have to think about is right to self-determination. Ultimately, intervention should be the last step. So, and intervention, of course, takes many different levels. Intervention may be simply the offer of assistance and the acceptance of assistance, so that the intervention is very soft and passive, but helpful and keeps the person independent and healthy. And then there's aggressive intervention, like petitioning for a guardianship or calling the older adult protective services in your county. And those interventions are more aggressive, more intrusive, and frankly, more abrasive. So, when are they needed? They're basically needed when the person is lacking the ability to really have any insight into their needs. So we have, again, older adults or disabled adults who need help, but accept help and seek help. And therefore, there's no need for intervention with them because they have insight and understanding and acknowledgement that they're in need of assistance and they accept the assistance. Intervention is needed, particularly when a person lacks insight. And we see that more and more depending upon the type of dementia that they typically have. And again, some of these impairments could be as a result of a health issue as opposed to an organic type of dementia, like what we often see particularly in the area agency on aging is we'll have a person who is not eating properly, is not getting enough hydration, and they have symptoms which make them appear to be far more impaired than they really are. But once their health improves, once they get proper nutrition and hydration and medication, they are often able to revert back to independence. So intervention is needed only when a person lacks, or aggressive intervention, I should say, is only needed when a person lacks the ability to understand or refuses to acknowledge that they need the help and are putting themselves and others in danger. So I'll finish on that so you can do your next slide, Kristen.
Great. So, thank you very much, Heather and Rob, for having me with you today. This is a topic that I'm extraordinarily passionate about as a geriatric certified specialist. Working with older adults with cognitive impairment is how I've spent a large majority of my career. And then even on a more personal level, my own grandfather passed from Alzheimer's disease. So many of the topics that we'll discuss today, I can speak both professionally about as well as the personal side in terms of how, as a family member, we were able to make those decisions to help transition him from living independently into a longer term care facility until his eventual passing. So certainly this is a topic that really I hold near and dear to my heart, given the many experiences that I've shared both with patients as well as with my own family. So from a physical perspective, we work together with the family to help determine when can my loved one stay safely within their home. And in order to boil down, like Rob insinuated, it's a very multifaceted decision because cognitive impairment can present itself in many different ways, and there may be periods of time where it waxes and wanes, which is then going to immediately translate into how that person can safely be independent in their home. Mm-hmm. So when we as physical therapists look at that safety component, we ask some of these questions to family members to help them discern what path is most suitable for their loved one. And the first one is, does their decreased cognition affect their ability to complete activities of daily living? And when I say activities of daily living, these are the tasks that are required for a human being to perform on a daily basis to get through the day. So things like getting out of bed, preparing meals, performing personal hygiene like showering, toileting, getting dressed, being able to manage some of the higher level skills like financial management or grocery shopping, community engagement and socialization. So all of these different components become parts of their daily life, and we have to determine if their cognition is interfering with their ability to perform those tasks safely and without any risk to them physically, as well as for the potential for future decline. So, there are often very key hallmark characteristics within ADLs that start to describe what part of cognitive decline your loved one may be experiencing. For instance, the first of the activities of daily living to start to slip, if you will, are things like higher level management, like financial management, or community engagement like grocery shopping. We call these the higher level executive functioning skills, which are often the first things that a person may struggle with. As their cognitive decline progresses, then their ability to do more simple tasks like meal prep or getting dressed, taking a shower, those will start to become affected as well. And oftentimes we'll use that sliding scale to help gauge how severe that cognitive impairment is. As Rob mentioned, one of the key components is understanding if the loved one is aware of their own deficits. Because certainly if someone is aware that they require that help, then help is available. And we can provide them with those resources. But in a situation like with my grandfather, he was not able to determine that his activities of daily living were being affected and that he was indeed making unsafe decisions. In fact, I remember one of our late arguments with him was, he used to like to climb the ladder to get up into the attic to change his air filter and walk across the beams of the attic. And we had to finally say, listen, Grandpa, that's not a safe decision. But he would have kept on going with that until the day he died because he was unaware of his deficits. Are there other medical issues that might predispose my loved one to a fall or another safety related issue? So certainly our older adults typically have other comorbidities or medical conditions that might further either exacerbate their cognitive issue or present some physical components that may also limit their ability to stay safely in the home. So whether that's something like diabetes, which can lead to neuropathy and balance dysfunction, or congestive heart failure, which will limit endurance and the ability to perform tasks in the community. These are some examples of some of these medical conditions that can either make that cognitive impairment worse because of lack of blood flow to the brain, or can cause other hosts of physical issues that could limit their ability to stay safely. And then lastly, is help even available? And, as having been a physical therapist for 17 years, I've learned a lot about family dynamics, and I'm sure Heather and Rob, you could speak the same way. In some families, people are very welcomed to help and they want to help their loved ones that are experiencing cognitive decline. But in other families, there may be some extraneous circumstances that limit their ability to provide that assistance, whether it's financial, whether it's dynamics within the family, whether it's distance, physical distance. Sometimes access to help isn't as easy as it seems. And as a result, our loved ones can really suffer in their ability to have that care need met. So certainly, as we look at that ability to stay safely in the home, and we'll discuss a couple more of these nuances as we go through the presentation today, these are some of the guiding questions that I like to start with so that we can start to lay the groundwork for what are the actual steps necessary moving forward. So I'll segue back to Rob here for his talk on POA and guardianship.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So, first and foremost, the tool that we want to use, if possible, is the power of attorney. What really is that? That is a written instrument where the principal assigns an agent as a person to make decisions for them if they're unable. Understand that no matter how you draft your power of attorney, you're always the boss, which provides both benefits and problems. But when you name someone as your agent under power of attorney, you're essentially giving them whatever authorities you have drafted in the document. And again, this is a voluntary appointment and it can be revoked at any time. It can, in fact, be revoked even if you lack judgment, even if you have impairment now and you're making bad decisions. So unfortunately, the power of attorney is not a foolproof tool, but it works most of the time as long as A, you have chosen good, responsible, trustworthy individuals as your agents, and B, you've drafted, or your attorney or somebody has drafted a document that appropriately is appropriately expansive on the authority you're giving your agent. So if you have a power of attorney that lacks, for instance, the ability for your agent to manage your bank accounts, and you become incapacitated and can no longer properly execute a new power of attorney, then your agent is probably going to be forced to get a guardianship because the power of attorney lacks the powers that they need. And at some point, the requirements under the law is a power of attorney is a legal contract, and therefore you have to have contractual capacity. And if you don't understand what you're signing, or your retention is so poor that you forget you signed it 5 minutes later, you're probably not appropriate to sign a new document at that point. So a power of attorney is an advocacy document, and the advocacy that you can perform as a power of attorney, depending upon the document as an agent, is whatever is in the document. So it could be for healthcare, it could be for end-of-life care planning, it could be for financial choices. Most people and most lawyers will do a separate document today for financial decision-making as compared to healthcare decision-making. Oftentimes, the person you appoint as your agent is the same person, but sometimes you have different family members or friends that you feel are stronger in certain areas, so you might appoint someone who is different. But the most important thing about a power of attorney is that a power of attorney is not is not giving up control, it is exerting control. So a power of attorney is where you're making the choice as to what you want to happen and for who you want to make those decisions for you. If you don't make that choice and you become incapacitated and you become in a position where you cannot legally execute a new power of attorney, then we get stuck with the guardianship. And the guardianship is a legal proceeding that has several components. The first component is that a judge needs to determine that you lack the ability to make legal decisions, first and foremost. That requires medical testimony, and this is an adversarial court proceeding. The second thing is that the judge has to determine who's the appropriate guardian. Unlike a power of attorney, this is where the judge is making a decision that you could have made if you had executed a power of attorney ahead of time. Because under Pennsylvania law, if a person who has a power of attorney in place needs a guardianship because of poor decision making and refusal to accept assistance, the judge needs to look at the power of attorney first. And if the power of attorney appears to be a valid document, the judge is first going to give the opportunity to the named agent, assuming that the principal had chosen that person because they trusted them. So unless you prove otherwise, the judge is going to say, okay, well, you named your son as your agent under power of attorney, and therefore, you trusted him at the time and you think he was a good decision maker. So unless someone comes forth with evidence that the son is not a good decision maker, the court will choose the son. However, if the court believes there's conflict or you haven't gone to the trouble of naming your son as your agent or other trusted individual, then the court is going to choose who they believe is going to do the job right. So it's very important that you make this power of attorney ahead of time, because at least you are stacking the deck in your favor that the people you trust will ultimately be your decision makers. If you don't make that power of attorney and you don't stack it in your favor, then the judge is going to do it, and the judge may appoint someone that's outside the family because the judge isn't comfortable that the family's going to make the right decisions, or the judge isn't comfortable that you felt your family would make the right decisions because you never named them as agents under power of attorney. Another thing, and a very important piece of the puzzle, is that a power of attorney is something that you control. You draft, you decide the provisions that go in it and the provisions that don't. If you want your son, daughter, spouse, whatever, to have broad ability to do financial planning and decision making on the medical end, you put that in the document. If a guardianship is needed, the judge is limited by what the statute says. And therefore, planning may not be able to be done with a guardianship that may be able to be done when you have drafted a proper power of attorney. So a power of attorney is a much more flexible document because, with the exception of performing illegal acts, you can pretty much put any authority and provisions in a written power of attorney. Whereas with a guardianship, there are very clear identified things that a guardian can do and can't do and need court approval. So you've got the situation where you potentially have things that a guardian can't do. You have the cost involved with a guardianship. You have the inflexibility. You have the fact that it's an adversarial proceeding. No child or spouse wants to bring their loved one to court in a guardianship. So ideally, first and foremost, we want to use the POA. It's a better advocacy tool, and the guardianship is a backup when there isn't one. So what is better? Ideally, power of attorney is the best tool because you're making the choices. You're making them ahead of time when you are, have the ability to think logically and to think broadly. When you're incapacitated, the things you say in a guardianship hearing probably do not reflect what you would have said at a prior time. So my preference, my guidance to my clients is first and foremost, it's cheaper, faster, easier, and a better planning tool is to have a power of attorney in place.
All right. And certainly as you work together with both your power of attorney or medical proxy, those people tend to be the ones that will have to make the difficult decisions on when someone is no longer safe to live at home, because in often cases, like we've already discussed, that ability to have insight into that decision can be very, very limited. So, certainly that decision can be very problematic for people and very stressful. So this slide is meant to help serve as a guide for those of you that are having to make those difficult decisions to determine when is it that my loved one can't live independently anymore. So these are some really clear signs that would indicate that your loved one needs either some additional assistance within the home or would benefit from transitioning to a facility or provider that would be able to meet their needs to help keep them safe. First and foremost is falling. And this goes on the list because, for one, up to 80% of people over the age of 80 experience a fall normally. And, when we tack on cognitive impairment on top of that, we see that falling becomes increasingly problematic and is a significant drain on the medical model from a financial perspective. Falling can lead to a variety of serious conditions, namely things like broken hips, as well as skull fractures or head injuries. One of the leading mortality causes for older adults over the age of 65 is actually a hip fracture, which is shocking to me because for those under 65, it's a relatively reasonable thing to recover from. But a hip fracture can lead to a spiral of physical decline that can be further exacerbated and further exacerbate cognitive issues because of the medications involved, the immobility, and the changes in blood metabolism. So certainly falling is a really clear sign that someone probably shouldn't be living independently, at least as long as they're continuing to fall on a regular basis. If someone's having difficulty managing their finances, this is another clear sign that they should not be living independently because, as we'll talk about in a minute, it leads to high risk for fraud as well as abuse. And certainly the amount of financial responsibility required to run a household is very, very high. And so certainly when we see that someone is having difficulty managing finances, it opens them up to a significant series of risks. Increased challenges with things like grocery shopping or maybe going out into the community to conduct errands. This would be a sign that someone shouldn't live independently since most of our seniors these days aren't technologically savvy enough to order their groceries online and have them shipped to the house. Certainly Amazon has made that a lot easier for many of my seniors, but once we tack on cognitive impairment on top of that, that can become a very difficult process for our seniors to navigate. So if they are having difficulty with community-related tasks and don't have access to assistance, whether through funding or services like Meals on Wheels or family, then that may be a great indication that they need to have some additional assistance. Increase in car accidents. Certainly this is outside of my scope of practice, but I experienced this personally with my grandfather where he started to have what he would call just tiny fender benders. He accidentally grazed the garage when he was pulling in. He backed into the mailbox. He ran over his newspaper a couple times. And while no one unfortunately was injured and there wasn't significant damage to the car, these were all indications that there were some processing issues as well as reflex issues at play. He wasn't able to correctly respond to the needs in a speed appropriate enough to drive a car. And certainly we know that that discussion of removing driving from someone's lifestyle is a very, very difficult one to have. But in the guise of having to make sure we're keeping everyone in the community safe, it certainly is one that's necessary that your local physician can assist with. Spoiled food in the refrigerator. Oftentimes as we get older, one of the normal aging processes is we lose the ability to discern smell. And this was, again, a common thing that I've seen in some of my patients as well as my own grandfather. They weren't able to tell when food had gone rotten because of smell, nor were they checking dates for expiration. And this can obviously lead to a whole host of GI-related issues as well as other safety concerns if the food that they're eating isn't providing them with the nutrients that they need, which, as Rob mentioned, can lead to further cognitive decline. Victim of fraud. If you notice that your loved one has been the victim of fraud, whether it's a financial related fraud or perhaps it's a social security number breach, these are very, very rampant in our older adults. In fact, many preyers of fraud will often find the home phone numbers of 55 plus neighborhoods and actually prey on those victims specifically because of the high rate of cognitive impairment. My own grandfather was a victim of financial fraud, and fortunately our bank notified my dad in time before he took out a $10,000 check to send to someone who had called him over the phone. So certainly this would be another indication if your personal loved one is at risk for either personal abuse or financial abuse from fraud. This is certainly an indication that help is required. A decrease in hygiene. As we talked about with activities of daily living, this is one of the last to go in terms of cognitive decline. Usually, as part of our innate role of being humans, we tend to take care of ourselves. We wash ourselves, we dress ourselves. However, towards the later stages of cognitive decline, this can start to slip dramatically and cause other health-related issues as a result. Namely things like yeast or bacteria growing on the skin, poor nail hygiene, which can lead to problems with balance and ill-fitting shoes, and put the skin at risk for higher rate of injury and wounds. And then lastly, paranoia. And this is one of those symptoms that Rob alluded to early on in regards to cognitive decline. It doesn't necessarily always have to mean memory decline. There are a whole host of symptoms related to cognitive decline, paranoia of which is one. And this is that feeling that people are out to get you. And certainly, as Rob outlined in the previous slide on POA and guardianship, one of the potential sources that people will take that paranoia out on is their POA, because they forget that that person has their best interest in mind, and they start to believe that maybe there are some ill play at hand. So it is not an easy task to be the medical proxy or power of attorney for someone with cognitive decline, because that paranoia can really rear its head in very, very ugly ways.
I'm going to go over these in a sec. I wanted to add one small thing to your previous slide, Kristen, because it's really important in what I do with the area agencies on aging and older adult protective services. Fraud, when it occurs, that vulnerability tends to be very early in the dementing process. People who are more cognitively impaired tend to be more paranoid. That paranoia is actually a protective item when it comes to financial exploitation, because they don't trust anybody and they won't give them their bank account numbers or anything like that. But early on in the dementing process, we see people who you would meet on the street and not identify as being impaired at all. Those are the ones who are most susceptible to being preyed on by scammers and financial exploiters. That's what we see in the county. We see someone who is driving, feeding themselves, taking their medications, and those are the ones who write the $60,000 or $70,000 check to a complete stranger. So I just wanted to add that, because I see that so often in our protective services cases.
That's a great point.
So how do we pay for long-term care? Well, the first resource we're always going to be looking at is personal finances. It's usually going to start, at least, coming from your own pocket. Now, a small percentage, and increasingly smaller percentage of people do have private long-term care insurance, but the incidence of purchases today is far lower than it was 20 or 30 years ago, because the products are so much more expensive. And when you look at actually just saving on your own, the differential between paying for a long-term care and putting money away on your own, it's much smaller than it used to be. I'm not saying that it's not a good investment, but the benefit of a long-term care policy today compared to what it was 25 years ago is significant. And so, there's a significant difference, I'm sorry. So the value is much lower than it was on a dollar for dollar basis, although the policies themselves are actually better policies and more comprehensive. So today, most of the people we're dealing with are going to be looking at either private pay or public sources. The single biggest and the largest payer for long-term care in this country is Medicaid. Unlike Medicare, Medicaid is a means-tested program. If you are a resident of Pennsylvania, and I'm assuming that everybody on the call probably is, Medicaid will basically pay for only two types of care. They will pay for care inside of the long-term care part of a nursing home, and they will pay, depending upon resources and income, for home and community-based services through the Medicaid waiver program. In Pennsylvania, there is currently no funding for personal care or assisted living, and there is what's called a personal care home stipend, but it is not through the Medicaid program, and it's very limited in what it will pay and who it'll pay. So for those people who have run out of funds or have funds but have a competent elder law attorney to help them preserve the funds, Medicaid is probably is going to be a large portion of who's of paying for care in nursing homes and in the community in our country. We are relatively limited in time today, so going through how Medicaid works and everything is going to be very difficult. But here's the way Medicaid works in general. Medicaid says you have available resources and protected resources. And once you spend down your available resources to a certain, typically very small number, Medicaid will kick in. Typical protected or exempt resources will be a home, a vehicle, a burial reserve, and some other items for the community spouse. When someone is an individual who is unmarried, the ability to plan ahead requires several years of notice if you want to protect resources for your family or for other people. If you are married, you can do what is called spend down crisis planning, and that type of planning allows the protection of significantly more resources to protect the community or healthy spouse. In a situation where you're seeking services in the community through the waiver program, that community spouse, you're living with them at the time and you still can retain your income. If you're going to a nursing home, then a portion of your income, all of it or none of it, depending upon the circumstances, are going to have to be paid to the nursing home for your care. However, again, when there's a spouse, there are a significant number of planning tools that we can use so that the spouse doesn't end up destitute with no money in the community and the nursing home getting paid. Probably the single biggest piece of advice I can give is don't assume there's nothing you can do. I have had various situations over the years. And again, I've been doing this type of practice for 28 years, and we filed probably, 500, 1,000 Medicaid applications in that period. I mean, a lot of apps. I have a very good working relationship with the Department of Human Services Legal Counsel. And, you know, there are many opportunities to protect resources if you find someone who knows what they're doing. You know, you do in this area, unfortunately, really need to go to a specialist who focuses their practice on this area of law. It's not something you can dabble in because there's a lot of little components and a lot of nuances that require someone who's actually done it. There's stuff that's not in the books that an experienced elder law attorney can pull out and help a family with. And there's just a lot of opportunities that people don't take advantage of that exist to preserve financial resources for a healthy spouse or for some family members. It comes down to being able to analyze the very specific family dynamic, the needs of the person who is eligible for, potentially eligible for Medicaid, and the needs and availability of support within the family. And you'd be surprised how often assets can be protected for the healthy spouse and for the other family members, depending, again, upon the individual facts of the family.
So while we certainly can't end on the down note of being broke and having to spend on all of your resources, we'll end on a positive note, which is offering you more time to be able to accumulate your funds if necessary to pay for pay privately for additional care in the home. And the way to do that is to help reduce falls in the home, since we did talk about that being one of the key indicators that really accelerates the need for additional care, whether it's in the home or transitioning to a different facility. And so this is really, from a physical therapist perspective, this is our wheelhouse in working with the older adult and really helping to keep our seniors safe within their homes so that they can lead functional and productive lives. So these first ones are just a couple tips on how to prepare the home itself physically so that the older adult can navigate safely within the home and have a reduced risk for falls. So first one is take away any throw rugs. Throw rugs are a significant tripping hazard because they tend to roll up on themselves and get tangled up under people's feet. And certainly if your loved one or if you yourself are using a device like a walker or a cane, that poses even more of a challenge for using that device safely within the home, as now the device itself can get tangled in the throw rug and even pitch over. So pulling up those old throw rugs and either tacking them down to the floor with double-sided tape, or just removing them altogether is a nice option for helping to mitigate some of those stumbling falls that might occur at entryways and in and out of the bathroom. Installing night lights. As we get older, our ability to discern light to dark and as a result of our pupillary reflex declines. And so oftentimes we see that falls occur at nighttime when someone wakes up and they turn on the light to go to the bathroom. Well, their eyes can't adjust to that change in light and can often result in a stumble near bedside or upon entering the bathroom. So having just a low amplitude night light that's turned on through the night is a very easy way to help mitigate that and make sure that our seniors are able to walk to the bathroom in the middle of the night without any issues. Installing grab bars in the shower and or near the toilet to assist with getting up and down from the toilet or in and out of the shower. Bathroom related falls tend to be the highest rated falls within the home because oftentimes the floor can be slippery in the case of a shower, or because of the frequency at which we use the toilet throughout the day, it tends to be the activity that is most commonly performed and therefore highly related to falls. So just having a grab bar installed is a great way to help reduce that. There are suction cup grab bars if your loved one or if you yourself are hesitant to put something fixed onto the wall and drill into the drywall. Home Depot and Lowe's both make a great suction cup grab bar that withstands significant amount of weight. And that's a nice option if someone is very reluctant to make a permanent change. Maintaining clear pathways. Typically you'll want those pathways to be clear in the most commonly traveled areas. So this tends to be from the front door into the family room or kitchen, in between the bedroom and bathroom. So making sure that there's not extraneous furniture, there's not boxes from Amazon stacked up, whatever the case may be that, especially this time of year with the holidays, we have to be a little more mindful of. And then certainly being aware of how pets can often become a barrier in the pathway, or they can become a potential risk for falls. So just making sure that we're keeping those pathways cleared so things don't get tangled up under the feet. One of my best recommendations that I try to implement with most of my seniors is to just get in the habit of carrying a cell phone in their pocket, or they make some really great cell phone straps that you can wear around your neck, almost like a lanyard, so that if you have a loved one who has a history of falling, they can carry that cell phone with them, and in the event they have a fall, they are able to reach out to get help. One of the saddest situations that I feel occurs to our older adults is they have a phone and they have no way to reach for help, and they end up spending days on the floor in their own home until someone realizes that they haven't heard from them. This can cause a variety of significant medical complications, as you can imagine, and it could have been easily prevented by just having access via a cell phone. If your loved one is not technologically savvy to utilize a cell phone, the workaround for that is to make sure that there's at least a house line that's low on a countertop or a side table, so that in the event they have a fall, they're able to crawl to that side table to reach up and grab the phone. It's certainly not desirable, but at least it's better than having literally no access to any helpline. Using an assistive device like a walker or a cane can help to improve someone's balance within their home. Certainly there's a whole host of cosmetic challenges that come along with implementing a device like this. And often that conversation is best navigated by a medical provider like a physician or a physical therapist. There are many, many devices available, and you'll want to find a trusted physical therapist who can help navigate those decisions for you and provide the recommendation that's most necessary for your loved one. Because all devices are not one size fits all. And by that I mean some people feel, oh, I'll just get that four-legged cane and that'll be the answer for helping to keep me safe. When in fact, that's probably one of the worst devices for someone with a balance dysfunction. So making sure that if you're thinking about pursuing a device, that you do seek some medical guidance to find the device that's appropriate for your loved one or for yourself. And then lastly, physical therapy. Reduction in balance is a natural part of the aging process without any pathology required, meaning that as we get older, our body naturally tends to lose its balance abilities. And that's because our bodies become slightly more sedentary and quiet as we get older, and we don't use the same balance skills as we do when we're younger, when we have to, run across the grass to grab a toddler or take the dog out for a hike. So that normal reduction in balance is to be expected. However, the important thing to note is that at any age, even into the 90s and 100s, we can remedy that balance loss and improve it to this almost the same level as our younger adults. So that requires the skilled intervention of a physical therapist, since it's necessary for us to be able to challenge that body beyond what a person could do on their own. Because essentially, if they challenge themselves on their own, they could fall. So we really want to make sure that we're able to challenge the body to keep their balance up to par so that it can quickly respond to a disturbance and prevent a fall in the home, therefore keeping our loved ones safer for significantly longer. So in conclusion, addressing cognitive decline early is the best way to prevent an issue. So starting to have a conversation with an elder law attorney or a physical therapist on maybe the best ways to financially prepare, or what types of devices could I start my loved one on to help keep them safer in the home, is really a critical aspect of preparing for future cognitive decline. And while certainly it's not a comfortable topic to acknowledge, you'll want to start to fortify your resources so that you have the right people to seek guidance from to help make this process significantly easier. People like Rob and myself, we've had these conversations hundreds and hundreds of times with clients about how to take the next step or ways to keep our loved ones safe. And so we can help provide you with the talking points necessary to make that transition smoother, as well as to reduce the overall stress of the situation. Certainly there are many resources available, so we encourage you to find the support that you need for your loved one, whether it's financial support, physical support, health support, resource support. Rob and I can help point you in directions of those resources so that your loved one can stay in the home longer, and so that you can feel that you're an active part of that decision-making process, both with them and if you are that person making that decision. We're here to help, and certainly we are available via email as well as consultation to help guide through this process so that it is indeed easier as you go down that path. As a thank you for joining today, I'd like to offer an exercise program that we've put together to help promote healthy aging. This can be used for someone with or without cognitive decline. It's a fairly simple exercise program, which is available for download from our website, reachyours.com/healthyaging. Certainly, if you are aged yourself, I would encourage taking a peek at it because it has some of my favorite stretches and exercises in it. Or if you're the caretaker of an older adult, these could help to improve their physical mobility within the home to help keep them safe. I've also included our Kennett Square phone number here, as well as my email address in the event that anyone has specific questions related to physical therapy. I encourage you to reach out and use me as a resource. Even if you don't need physical therapy yourself, I can help provide some answers in regards to health and health management, and I am here and available for you in order to do that. And Rob, I'll pass it off to you. You can tell a little bit about your consultations.
Well, actually, we're going to offer, to offset your exercise offer, we're going to offer them donuts.
Rob, come on.
No, I would never do that. I'm health conscious. Ours is
funny.
unwritten here. You know, we are doing, currently due to COVID, we are doing Zoom consultations very much like this presentation. Rarely, actually, I'm surprised, but very rarely do people prefer phone consults. It's probably about a 10-to-1 ratio. Most people, older adults and their children, are very comfortable with the Zoom. It's very workable because it's a much more personal consult than a phone consult. We are looking forward to the day when we can actually be back in the same room as our clients. But for now, in an abundance of caution, we are doing only the Zoom video consults. You know, we're happy to help. Our website has a lot of information on it. The number you have reaches us. For going forward, we do have the 3 offices, as Heather mentioned. You know, we have our main office in Plymouth Meeting right off of the Pennsylvania Turnpike, right next door to the Plymouth Meeting Mall. We also have one on Route 30 in Radnor Township, Delaware County, and on Route 29 in Malvern, Chester County. In certain circumstances, we do make home visits, again, not now due to COVID, but we do that. And please call us if you have any questions or want to set up a consultation.
Great. And with that, let's turn it back over to Heather. Any questions in the chat box?
There are no questions in the chat box, but we're happy to entertain some questions right now. And also, I want to mention, we do have senior resource guidebooks that we're happy to send you. If you reach out through the email communication that I've already set forth, you can reach out and let me know the best address, and we're happy to send them to you. We have one for Delaware County, Montgomery County, and Chester County. We do service the other Philadelphia and Bucks counties as well, but we don't have a book for them. These guides have elder law articles that pertain to anybody in Pennsylvania, but they are specific for each county in that they will specify assisted living and personal care communities for a specific county, or rehab support associations and government offices. So feel free to reach out if you would like one of these. And any questions that we have, please let us know. Now is a perfect time to unmute yourself and share your thoughts or comments or questions about today's presentation.
There was a question in the chat, Heather.
Okay.
So is life insurance included as an asset when applying for Medicaid? So life insurance cash value is considered part of your spendable assets. If it's like a term policy, the death benefit is irrelevant. And there is a small exemption of $1,000 in cash value. But beyond that, if you have a large policy that's accumulated a lot of cash value, then it will be something that has to be either spent down or otherwise planned, you know, in consideration as part of the asset protection planning.
Hey, Rob and Kristen, this is Lucy, a medical social worker with Bayetta Home Health. Quick question for you guys. I had a family member always ask me, you know, you know, you have you're noticing that your parent has, you know, the cognitive decline because of hospitalization and whatnot. But when can you determine that they really cannot live by themselves, like what you're discussing now? How do we approach it with with the client, him or herself, to understand that, you know, they're lacking in their safety choices? Because I had a client in respite stay for 30 days, and the recommendation from our team was not, she cannot go home without 24/7 care. As we approached it with her, she's like, well, I don't need 24/7 care. I'll be willing to get some help, but I don't want 24-hour care. And I don't think I need 24-hour care at this point. But it was someone who really didn't need help, maximum assist for ADLs and IADLs. So, you know, the family member is saying, you know, how can we keep her there?
Well, Lucy, every case is going to be very individual. Because if you have someone who is very resistant and basically borderline cognitively, you know, it's difficult, because when a client comes to me and says, look, mom's borderline cognitively, sometimes she's with it, sometimes she's not. Then the family has to take the risk of either saying, we're going to intervene on the front end with the possibility of alienating our mother and losing the fight, meaning we could file for guardianship and say, well, mom really is not engaging in safe activities. And the judge say, well, I think she still has the right to make her decisions now. And at that point, you have alienated mom because she's now mad at you because you pursued that. Obviously, it comes down to the personality of the older adult. If the older adult is cooperative and they could be gently cajoled into more safe, whether it's moving out or obtaining more assistance like from you guys, then you would, start with that. If you've got a person who's got a history of very belligerent behavior, who's always been very independent, one of the things that I see in my practice, more so on the protective services side, is someone who never married, never had kids. They've always made their own decisions from age 18, and despite impairment, they're not going to stop making those decisions now. We had that guardianship emergency hearing yesterday at 12 o'clock for that one, for a lady just like that. And, in those cases, you have to force the issue. So it's very individual. And there are cases, Lucy, and we've had this discussion before. There are cases where I will tell the family, you've got to wait till the crash occurs. And that crash, hopefully, is a figurative crash and not an actual crash in the car. But sometimes there needs to be some sort of event that gives you that last piece of evidence that you need to take a strong intervention.
The other thing that I'll add to that is in some situations, people are reluctant to acknowledge a cognitive decline because it feels very intangible. So a strategy that I've utilized with family members and actual clients is to administer a test like a mini mental. So if you were to partner with someone like a social worker or a therapist who could administer that test, that provides hard evidence as to how they are cognitively performing compared to an age-related norm. And so sometimes it just takes that little bit of data to say, we're seeing some of these changes. You're right. In many cases, you will be able to care for yourself. However, when I compare your function to someone else, I do see a significant decline, and we need to start to compromise on how to address that issue. The other nice thing about something like a mini mental or some of the other cognitive tests available is that you can see changes over time. So you can administer that and then maybe a year later or 2 years later re-administer, and you can start to look for some patterns in the behavior of your loved one to determine and set some type of benchmark as to when intervention is going to be necessary. It's not a fail-safe answer because certainly performance on a cognitive test doesn't necessarily translate into how they manage their home and their safety. But it is somewhat of a nice way to start to bridge that conversation with someone who might initially be resistant.
Kristen, you make a really good, a truly excellent point. One of the things that the mini mental is a great tool. It's a screening tool. But people need to understand that some people who get a 29 out of 30 on a mini mental shouldn't be making decisions, and some people who get a 20 should because their judgment is still good. What the mini mental does, though, is it gives you the next step. If it's clear that the person is doing very poorly, if someone gets a 10 or a 20, a 15, this dysfunction is significant. But if you have someone who does well, that doesn't mean that your gut should stop there. One of the things that I recommend more often, and it's more of a challenge because it's harder to set up, but getting the neuropsychological testing is really the key for me when I have someone who performs okay on a mini mental, but is clearly having functional challenges. And those neuropsych tests, as Kristen had referred to, are those extra type of testing that really drills down much further than a mini mental. And those are the ones that are make or break. Because unfortunately, many primary care physicians are very well intended and they'll use a mini mental, a full steam mini mental in their office, but it's not really a good tool if someone scores high on it, but otherwise seems to be having deficits. Because there are people who can still score well on it, but are making very poor choices. And that's where it's nice to have as a tool, but it only helps you when the scores are very clearly low. And I don't want families to stop there. If they have concerns, they need to go one step further and get a full neuropsychological test battery.
And I agree with you, Rob.
Yeah, neuro exam itself doesn't necessarily do it, because a neurologist isn't going to do what a neuropsychologist will.
Totally agree. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Rob, we often strongly encourage our clients to go down to will go with them to Penn Memory Center or to another memory center or team in their area if Penn is not relatively convenient to them, because we just gain so much, and their team is really able to help fine tune where the deficits are. And not only that, but also make recommendations that can help the person adapt and accept, or at least begin to accept what is going on with them and take a more positive outlook and be able to frame it in such a way that it's like, all right, you have this problem, but we're able to, work with this or that program to help you maintain what you have and, provide a safety net. But it just puts a whole different positive light on the situation, and it can lift that sense of hopelessness that people often encounter when they get these results or these diagnoses. They're now using the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, or the MOCA. I'm certified in that. That's what we use here. And that also helps us really distinguish some of the finer points of, where their abilities lie or do not lie. And the nice thing too with working with the neuropsych is they're able to really tell you when you need documents signed whether or not that person is able to do it. So
yeah, and I think somebody also in the chat box mentioned, there are a number of different potential resources. There's geriatric assessments, which are medical as well as cognitive, and they will tend to use like a MOCA. They probably won't do what's equivalent to a neuropsych, but then
Right.
you have Penn's Memory Center. Jefferson has a bunch of neuropsychologists. Penn has a bunch of neuropsychologists. And then there are private neuropsychological groups in and around the Delaware Valley where you can find them. They're not as abundant as your average PhD or PsyD, but as a practical matter, there's the neuropsychological battery is the best of all of the testing groups, because the subtests that they use tend to focus on the type of brain functions that people use for higher level thinking.
mm-hmm.
Whereas the mini mental focuses a lot on short-term memory, the MOCA is like a mini mental kind of upgraded or updated. There's a little bit more of the neuropsychological testing in the MOCA, but it's not quite like a real battery. But a neuropsych battery is usually, somewhere between 2 and 4 hours, depending upon the evaluator.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
I just wanted to share a few things that have worked for some patients as well as family members. My brother has Parkinson's, and my sister is mentally challenged with some cognitive problems. They have light up toilet seats now that are pretty inexpensive, and that has helped a lot in the toileting in the evening times, as well as some glow in the dark tape that we put close to the doorway of the bathroom. That's really helped a lot. I also had a client who didn't want any kind of medical device at all, but he kept his car keys in his pocket, and he talked to his neighbor, and when he had a problem or fell, he pressed the emergency button on his car. His car alarm would go off and someone would come and check on him. So just a few other little hints of things that have happened and worked. And thank you so much for this presentation. It's been great.
Great suggestions. Those are wonderful.
They are great. And I had a question, Robert. If you have a person who has established a power of attorney and is still able to make decisions, but just established that power of attorney just for like a hospitalization, if they're still able to make decisions, is that power of attorney document, still valid, allowing the power of attorney to do like whatever?
Well, as long as the person is able to, clearly articulate what their wishes are,
Right.
the agent can't overrule them.
Got it.
The power of attorney is really there as a backup when either the principal chooses not to make decisions and wants to delegate that, or when they are unable to do it. But as long as you can articulate your own wishes, you're still the boss, no matter what the document says.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions or comments?
Thank you so much. It was a very professional presentation, and I'm sure helpful to a lot of people. Thank you.
Yes, it was. It was great.
Always our pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
our pleasure. And thanks for being here.
Thank you. And we will be including this in the Slutsky Elder Law newsletter. So if there's any part of it that you want a recap of, you can always check that out next week or in the upcoming weeks. And we will also have it available on our website, and it's also available on Kristen's websites as well.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
Kristen has a plethora of different videos available on her website with different topics that you might want to check out as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you guys
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so
Wonderful
much.
day.
If there's any other elder law questions that you have, we do have coffee chats every other Wednesday at 2 o'clock with elder care attorney Rob Slutsky. We're happy for you to join us. And we do offer a caregiver support group on Fridays at 1 o'clock that you can attend or share with a family member if you feel that they would enjoy a little extra support, especially during this challenging time. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you, Kristen, for your wonderful presentation. And Elder Care Attorney Rob Slutsky, we really enjoyed your webinar.
Thank
Happy
you.
everybody with us
Thank
today.
you.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much. We'll follow up with an email. Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.